Most people think tawakkul means trusting Allah after you've done everything you can. That is not wrong. It is just not deep enough. Because if that were all tawakkul meant, then anxiety would disappear the moment you made a good plan. It doesn't. You make the plan. You create the spreadsheet. You send the application. You prepare for the conversation. You do everything correctly. And then your chest still tightens at 2 a.m. Your mind still runs simulations. Your body still behaves as though the future is hunting you. Which raises a disturbing question. If you already did what you could do, then what exactly are you still carrying? What is the weight that remains? Most people assume that weight is uncertainty. The classical scholars said something far more unsettling. The weight is authorship. The hidden belief that you are somehow responsible for producing outcomes. Not actions. Outcomes. And that single confusion sits beneath an extraordinary amount of human suffering. Because the moment you secretly believe you are the author of outcomes, reality becomes terrifying. Every failure becomes a verdict on you. Every delay becomes a threat. Every uncertainty becomes a wound. But once you understand tawakkul properly, not as a comforting emotion, not as positive thinking, not as religious optimism, but as a law embedded into the structure of existence itself, you begin to understand something much larger. You begin to understand why anxiety exists, why control is an illusion, why sincere effort matters, why the Prophet described tawakkul the way he did, and why the entire universe appears to be teaching a lesson that most human beings spend their lives resisting. There is a very deep secret hidden inside tawakkul, and once you see it, you will start noticing it everywhere. The common translation of tawakkul is trust in God. Useful, but incomplete. Because the phrase trust in God sounds emotional. It sounds like a feeling, a mood, a comforting state of mind. Tawakkul is not primarily a feeling. It is a perception. More specifically, it is accurate perception. Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, in Madarij al-Salikin, describes tawakkul as one of the highest stations of the heart because it emerges from recognizing reality as it actually is. Notice the implication. Tawakkul is not creating something, it is seeing something. The difference is enormous. Most people think they are trying to learn trust. The scholars would say they are trying to remove a misunderstanding. Imagine a child sitting in a car, believing he is steering the vehicle because he is holding a plastic toy wheel. His fear would make sense. Every turn would feel like his responsibility. Every obstacle would feel terrifying. Every mistake would feel catastrophic. But his fear would be built upon a false perception. The problem would not be a lack of courage. The problem would be confusion about who is actually driving. This is the human condition. You perform actions. Allah creates results. You perform actions. Allah creates results. You perform actions. Allah creates results. The sentence is simple. The ego hates it. Because the ego wants partnership and authorship. It wants to feel responsible not merely for effort, but for reality itself. And this is where anxiety quietly enters. Not because you lack trust. Because you have accepted a job description that was never yours. The Quran repeatedly dismantles this illusion. And whoever relies upon Allah, then he is sufficient for him. Not because outcomes suddenly become easy. Not because difficulties disappear. But because the burden of authorship returns to its rightful owner. The burden was never yours. Full stop. This sounds backwards. Control should create security. That is what most people assume. Yet observe your own experience. The people most obsessed with controlling every outcome are rarely the most peaceful. They are often the most exhausted. Because reality refuses to cooperate with their self-image. Modern psychology has noticed something similar. Much anxiety emerges when the mind attempts to manage variables that exceed its influence. The nervous system remains activated because it perceives an impossible task. It is trying to control what cannot be controlled. The ancient scholars approached the same phenomenon from a theological angle. They said the heart becomes agitated whenever it forgets the distinction between sabab and mosabib, cause and causer, means and creator of means. You plant the seed. You cannot command germination. You can irrigate the soil. You cannot manufacture life. You can prepare. You can strive. You can sacrifice. But the transformation itself belongs elsewhere. Ibn Atiyallah writes in Al-Hikam, "Relieve yourself of planning. For what another has carried out on your behalf, do not undertake yourself." He is not condemning planning. He is condemning psychological ownership. Two people can create the same plan. One experiences peace. The other experiences panic. The external action is identical. The internal theology is different. One sees himself as a servant operating within divine decree. The other sees himself as a manager attempting to supervise existence. Only one of those positions is sustainable. And this is the first paradox. The less obsessed you become with control, the more stable you become inside uncertainty. Not because uncertainty disappeared, because you stop demanding powers that belong only to Allah. Now we arrive at the mechanism itself, the part most discussions skip. Why does tawakkul transform the human being so deeply? Because tawakkul attacks the false self, not the visible self, the imagined self. The version of you that secretly believes I am what makes things happen. That identity is far more embedded than most people realize. It hides beneath ambition. It hides beneath perfectionism. It hides beneath self-blame. It even hides beneath some forms of religious practice. The imagined self wants to be indispensable. It wants to be the axis around which events rotate. And reality continuously humiliates that illusion. A single phone call changes everything. A diagnosis changes everything. A market crash changes everything. One conversation changes everything. One unexpected opportunity changes everything. Life keeps revealing the same lesson. You are influential, but you are not sovereign. You are responsible, but you are not ultimate. You are commanded to act, but you are not the author of consequences. The Quran does not merely teach this. It displays it repeatedly. Prophets make plans. Then Allah unfolds realities no one anticipated. Musa, Yusuf, Ibrahim, Muhammad. Again and again, human effort, divine authorship, human effort, divine authorship, human effort, divine authorship. The pattern repeats so consistently that it begins to look less like a religious teaching and more like a universal law. Because it is. And the moment you begin seeing it, something unexpected happens. Your relationship with effort changes completely. Not less effort, cleaner effort, not weaker effort, purified effort. Not passive effort, liberated effort. And that changes everything. One of the greatest misunderstandings about tawakkul is that it weakens ambition. People hear phrases like, leave it to Allah, and imagine withdrawal, less striving, less discipline, less responsibility. The exact opposite is true. The Prophet was the most reliant upon Allah and simultaneously the most strategic human being who ever lived. He planned, prepared, consulted, migrated, organized, took precautions, built alliances, sent scouts, managed resources. Tawakkul did not reduce action, it purified action. This is why the famous hadith about tying your camel is so important. A man asked whether he should leave his camel untied and trust Allah. The Prophet replied, "Tie it, then trust Allah." Most people think this hadith teaches balance. It does, but it teaches something deeper as well. The camel is your responsibility. The outcome is not. The action belongs to you. The result belongs to Allah. The distinction sounds simple, yet most suffering emerges from crossing that line. You study for the exam. Good. You become emotionally dependent upon the grade. Dangerous. You pursue marriage. Good. You become convinced that your happiness depends upon a specific person. Dangerous. You build a business. Good. You attach your identity to its success. Dangerous. Because the moment results become part of your identity, your worship becomes contaminated with fear. Now your nervous system is not merely pursuing a goal, it is defending a self-image. And self-images are fragile. This is where Ibn al-Qayyim's analysis becomes remarkably psychological. He explains that tawakkul emerges from certainty regarding Allah's wisdom, power, mercy, and management of affairs. Notice what that means. Tawakkul is not confidence in outcomes. It is confidence in the one producing outcomes. Those are completely different things. One is fragile, the other is not. Because outcomes fluctuate. Allah does not. The person attached to outcomes experiences emotional whiplash. Success inflates him. Failure crushes him. Delay terrifies him. Loss defines him. The person attached to Allah experiences something else. Not numbness, not passivity. Stability, a center of gravity that survives changing circumstances. This is the second paradox. When results stop belonging to you, effort becomes stronger. Because fear loses its leverage. This is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable. Most people approach tawakkul as a transaction. Trust Allah so things work out. Rely upon Allah so life improves. Surrender so blessings arrive. There is truth inside those statements, but they are still too shallow because they quietly place your desires at the center of reality, and tawakkul dismantles precisely that. Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah, "You may dislike a thing while it is good for you, and you may love a thing while it is bad for you. Allah knows, and you do not know." Pause there. That verse is devastating to the ego, because it exposes a possibility most people spend their lives resisting. What if your suffering is not that life refuses to give you what you want? What if your suffering is that you assume your wants are reliable guides? The self-image says, "I know what would make me whole." Reality repeatedly answers, "No, you don't." The job you desperately wanted, the relationship you begged for, the opportunity you chased, the loss you feared. Again and again, years later, you discover meanings that were invisible when events first occurred. And suddenly tawakkul stops being trust that Allah will deliver your preferred future. It becomes trust that Allah sees dimensions you cannot. That changes everything. Because now uncertainty transforms. Previously, uncertainty meant danger. Now uncertainty means hidden knowledge. Previously, uncertainty meant absence. Now uncertainty means limitation of perception. Think about standing inches away from a massive painting. All you see are random brushstrokes, dark colors, broken patterns, no coherence. Then you step back. The image emerges. The chaos was not chaos. Your perspective was incomplete. This is one of the deepest dimensions of tawakkul. You are not merely surrendering outcomes. You are surrendering your claim to complete understanding. And that may be harder. At this point, Tawakkul begins expanding beyond personal spirituality. It starts explaining reality itself. Look carefully at creation. Nothing possesses itself. The tree receives, the ocean receives, the clouds receive, the stars receive. Your own heartbeat is receiving. You did not create your lungs. You do not consciously regulate your liver. You do not command cellular repair. Thousands of processes sustain your existence right now without consultation. Dependence is not an exception in reality. Dependence is reality. Absolute independence belongs only to Allah. Everything else exists through reception. Everything else exists through continual need. Everything else exists through divine maintenance. This is why Tawakkul is not merely a spiritual technique. It is alignment with what already is. The arrogant self experiences dependence as humiliation. The awakened self experiences dependence as truth. And truth is liberating. Because pretending to be independent is exhausting. Pretending to be self-sufficient is exhausting. Pretending to control reality is exhausting. The Quran repeatedly returns to this theme. Not because Allah needs you to feel small. Because illusions create suffering. Reality heals. The imagined self says, I sustain myself. Reality says no. The imagined self says, I control my future. Reality says no. The imagined self says, I understand what is best. Reality says not completely. Every disappointment becomes a lesson. Every delay becomes a lesson. Every uncertainty becomes a lesson. The lesson is always the same. You are a servant, not a sovereign. And strangely, that realization does not shrink you. It frees you. Now we need to address the trap. Because people misunderstand Tawakkul in two opposite directions. The first mistake is obvious. Control everything. Depend on yourself. Carry the universe on your shoulders. Most viewers already recognize that danger. The second mistake is more subtle. Call laziness Tawakkul. Call avoidance Tawakkul. Call passivity Tawakkul. This is far more common than people admit. Someone avoids effort and says Allah will provide. Someone refuses preparation and says Allah will handle it. Someone abandons responsibility and calls it surrender. Classical scholars rejected this completely. Al-Ghazali, in the Ihya Ulum al-Din, repeatedly emphasizes that reliance upon Allah does not eliminate causes. It corrects your relationship to causes. The farmer still plants. The merchant still trades. The student still studies. The worshipper still strives. The difference lies in where the heart rests. Imagine two farmers. Both plant identical seeds. Both water the soil. Both work equally hard. One believes the harvest ultimately comes from his expertise. The other recognizes expertise itself as a gift from Allah. Outwardly identical, inwardly worlds apart. One worships causes, the other uses causes. One becomes shattered by failure. The other grieves, learns, adjusts, and continues. The mirror doesn't lie. Your emotional reaction often reveals what you were actually relying upon. Not perfectly. Individual experiences vary. Human emotions are complex. But as a pattern, the thing whose loss destroys your inner stability is often the thing you have unconsciously elevated beyond its proper place. And that is a frightening realization. Because many people discover they were not trusting Allah. They were trusting outcomes. They were trusting plans. They were trusting themselves. Allah was simply attached to the language, not the reliance. So how do you actually cultivate tawakkul? Not as an idea, as a perception. Begin with 3 movements: knowledge, witnessing, action, knowledge first. Before sleeping tonight, choose one anxiety, just one. Name it precisely, not generally. Precisely then ask yourself, what part belongs to me? What part belongs to Allah? Separate action from outcome. Write it down if necessary. The clarity matters. Next comes witnessing. Observe how often your mind crosses that boundary. Watch how frequently it attempts to supervise outcomes. Watch how often it rehearses futures it cannot control. Do not judge yourself. Just notice. The noticing itself is powerful, because you cannot surrender what you have not first identified. Then comes action. Do the next responsible thing, only the next thing, not 10 steps ahead, not 6 months ahead. The next thing. Send the email, make the call, study the chapter, have the conversation, then stop. Let the